a systems engineer for Cisco Systems in the U.S. Sales Public Sector Organization. Recently, I completed my CCIE certification, a CCIE in security. I'm recording this video for other sales engineers in Cisco Systems and sales engineers in our partner organizations who are interested in pursuing the CCIE security certification. I'm recording some advice that I wish somebody would have given me 3 years ago when I started down this process. Hopefully, after watching this video, you can feel more confident in your decision to pursue the CCIE certification coming from a sales role, if that's something you want to do. And then once you make that decision, hopefully you can feel more confident in your study path towards the CCIE. So in order to understand my CCIE journey, it's helpful to understand my background. I've been in digital security for 10 years, starting in 2001 when I was with Enterasys Networks and Enterasys bought Dragon IDS, Intrusion Detection Systems. Dragon was a BSD/Linux product, and I had a background in Linux/Unix for my days at the Air Force. So I led a charge to do Dragon deployments for my sales region. In 2003 to 2008, I worked for Introvert Networks/McAfee Security doing IntraShield IPS deployments. So between those two, 8 years of really deep IDS/IPS experience. Also in 2007 to 2008, I found myself traveling a lot, and I developed my own internet company, checkinsooner.com. The idea was that if you're stuck in a middle seat on a flight from Dallas to London, and it's a full flight, that the system would poll the airline's website every few minutes to see if somebody else on that flight who was in a window seat changed their flights or moved into first class, thereby opening up a good seat in coach. And the system would automatically move you from your middle seat to the good seat and send you a confirmation email while you were doing something else. That required a lot of background in HTML, a lot of Perl, regular expression, grepping, things like that. In addition to those, I've had a CCNP, Cisco Certified Network Professional, since 2000. So if you look at my skill set in 2008, CCNP, 8 years of IDS/IPS, ability to really get in HTML, coding, things like that. As far as digital security tools, I was very comfortable around things like a Backtrack CD, Metasploit framework, other such tools such like Cain Enable, and all the various digital security tools that the people in security would regard as core digital security tools. I figured with that kind of a background and the CCNP, the CCIE journey for me would be maybe about 6 months. It turns out I was very wrong, and the reason is all those things I mentioned before, as far as like, Backtrack, Cain Enable, things that HPing2, things that people would feel very comfortable who do network security for a living, those have zero relevance to the Cisco CCIE security. Cisco security and industry security sometimes are two very different things, and this was one case where it certainly applied to me. So starting my CCIE process, I thought about the areas that I needed to come up to speed on. I figured I had a good knowledge in IDS/IPS systems, but one thing that I really didn't have a lot on was firewalls. So I went out to Barnes & Noble, purchased the ASA book available from there, and made it my mission that if I knew everything I knew in IDS/IPS, and in addition I would know everything from a firewall perspective, that would be enough to pass the CCIE security. That's a wrong assumption. Don't start at firewalls, start at routers. Cisco is a routing and switching company, and really if you look at the CCIE, even in security, it is very heavy router based. Another thing that I did early on was I was at Cisco Live, and I was looking at the various people that offered self-study materials, and I settled in on CC Bootcamp material, which happened to be the lowest cost at the time. That also turned out to be a misstep. The CC Bootcamp, while it might work for some people, certainly did not work for me. In particular, the solution guides were non-existent, and they really just listed here is the solution in the iOS code that would just be the solution without explaining why and the various outputs you should get on the terminal when you enter in each line. So I would say those two missteps cost me a lot of time, even potentially a year. Right off of the bat. Studying the wrong material can be very detrimental. So what is the right material? Well, routers. So step one is getting yourself a lab. Here you can see my lab. Your lab needs to consist of
6 routers, 2 ASA devices, 1 IPS sensor, 4 switches. And also you need to have a 2500 access switch, the ones with the octal cables. Here, I'll show each of them in a little bit more detail right now. Here are my routers, and I have the 2800 series routers, both with Ethernet and serial cables. The 2 ASA devices, both 5510s for me. 5510s work well. They need to be of the same model so you can practice HA and failover scenarios. Your 4200 sensor. Switches, I have 4 here. The Yusuf Labs only require 2. And then a 2500 access layer switch, or 2500 console switch. At first I thought I could just do these things through Telnet, through in-band management, but you don't want to do that. You want to get these guys with the big old octal cables.
Once you've got your labs set up, you want to start practicing the use of Bajaj Labs. Under a Google search, look at the Cisco Press Store. And then search for Yusuf. This is what you want: CCIE Security version 3.0 Configuration Practice Labs ebook 2nd edition. This contains 2 labs. Both these labs are very similar to what you will actually see in the actual lab, and these come with full explanations of the grading for what the proctors are looking at. That's as important as anything else. Even if you think you do it right, if it's not the way the proctors want to see it, there's no guarantee you'll get credit for it. So here are the labs. The best way to start your preparation is starting with the zone-based firewall, which there is a zone-based firewall problem on the first lab, page 22. It's the task is to create a couple zones and do a couple different inspection rules. But the key here is, down at the bottom on this task, it requires you to write multiple class maps and apply those multiple class maps and even multiple policy maps, and apply those deep packet inspection policy maps inside the main policy map, apply those multiple class maps inside the one policy map. If you can do this and do this well, you're well set up to do the later tasks in the lab, including inspection on ASAs that require the same class map policy map language, and other problems, because you see that class map policy map over and over again in the security blueprint. After zone-based firewalls, I'd suggest studying NAT. NAT is a very big portion of what you're required to in ASAs. You probably will be required to do some types of translations on your ASAs, whether they be inside translations or outside translations. And then you might very well be required to do some NAT translations on your iOS devices. So practicing NAT on an iOS device and really understanding it, really understanding port translation versus network address translation, identity translation, all those things, translations with access lists, all those things will help you very well. So master zone-based firewalls, master NAT. Then after that, really strive to master VPN. The VPN is 30% of the lab, 25% of the lab, somewhere in that range. So with the passing score being 80, there's no way you can pass the lab without knowing some VPN. And typically students find VPN to be the hardest. Study your LAN-to-LAN VPNs and study your static virtual tunnel interface VPNs. Know those cold. And here you see the secure connectivity guide, the documentation where you'll find LAN-to-LAN VPNs and secure virtual tunnel interface VPNs. Again, this is something that before you attempt the lab, you should know at least those 2 cold without any documentation. The one area where you can reference the documentation, where you should reference the documentation in the lab, is for VPN configurations involving GetVPN and DMVPN, because those are long, involved sections
and there are very good documentation examples that you see here on the screen. Specifically in the configuration guide towards the bottom, you have an example on Get VPN, you have an example on DM VPN for both the key servers and group members, and then also hubs and spokes on DM VPN. You should at least be familiar enough with those where you can look at what's in the lab and look at this documentation and do whatever task the lab asks you to do. Whether it's a troubleshooting section or whether it's a configuration section, you should be able to know the relevant parts of those configurations and what's important and what's not in those sample configs. One more thing to know are your 2-point commands. These are commands such as service or sysop, like sysop no proxy arp, that you might need to do on an ASA. A good place to find all those is at this ISR computing site. And they have well broken down these various little guides that relate to the CCIE security. Such as here, how to disable unused unnecessary services. There, when you take the actual lab, each task will be graded anywhere from 2 points to 6 points. And the 2-point questions are typically one-liners, something easy, whereas the 6-pointers are more involved. And all your 2-point ones you should know, study the site, learn all your 2-point commands.
So are you ready to take the lab? Well, I think there's a couple easy ways to figure this out. Can you go from this, which is a blank sheet of paper, to this, which is a LAN-to-LAN IPsec tunnel, purely from memory? No documentation needed, nothing else like that. You should be able to do it for a LAN-to-LAN IPsec tunnel. You should also be able to do it for a static virtual tunnel interface IPsec VPN scenario. You also need to do this from blank sheet of paper to full config for zone-based firewalls. If you can do that, then you have gotten down the concepts of class map policy, map service policy, and multiple class maps going under a single policy map, those types of things. You need to be able to do all that kind of stuff from your head, no documentation. Also, the 2 USIF labs, can you do those USIF labs, including the VPN sections? Can you do it in the required time frame? Minimal amount of documentation. Don't plan on the documentation working. In RTP, I don't believe any graphics work. And in San Jose, too, when I took my lab, actually one section that I needed for a VPN config was not available to me. But it didn't bother me because I've done it so many times that I've committed it to memory. So that's really where there's no substitute for knowing this material and knowing it cold, knowing it without documentation. And the only way that comes is with repeated practice. So should you take the lab? That's a really valid question for somebody in sales. Because as I said, this is what you end up getting measured on is speed and execution and rote memory. So the ability to do it is one thing, but the ability to do it under pressure with time constraints is another animal. So plan on spending a lot of time practicing the same scenarios over and over again until they are fully drilled in your head. You know, in the end, for my journey, it's rewarding. It's something I like to think of this as a marathon that I wanted to run, something that I wanted to prove to myself that I can do it, and sure enough, I could do it. So, you know, in other areas, if people are working already in TAC or something like that, then they're dealing with this on a daily basis. So the bar is a little bit easier for them. Whereas in sales, we have to keep focus on our customers and make what's in the CCIE relevant to our jobs. But this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I want to prove to myself that I can do it, and sure enough, I can do it. So I'm no spring chicken. If I can do it, you can do it too. So good luck in your preparation, good luck in your exam, and reach out to me with any questions at any time. My email is on the video. Thanks for watching.